All right, well, let's get going for this webinar. This is a great topic. Excited to share this information with you this month. We've got Jasmine Sutton. She's an associate counselor with It's Just Therapy. They're based out of Tigard, but she spent 18 years in law enforcement with Portland Police and has now transitioned to become a clinical counselor. So has a ton of information, certainly sitting in the seat of public safety from the law enforcement perspective and first response, but now working with first responders in the clinician role. So really excited to have her. And this is a follow-up to the conversation we had last month around the mind-body connection and how the things that we experience in life, how those impact not only the thoughts we have, but also how our body feels about that and the tools we have. So the previous conversation was based around fitness and movement, sleep, and the foundations of how important that is to how we interact daily, but then also nutrition. So this is that follow-up to that. So really glad to have Jasmine here. So with that, I'll give it to Jasmine for a brief intro, and then we'll get right into kind of how stress impacts us and the chronic impacts. So Jasmine, pumped to have you.
Hi, thanks for having me. Yeah, I mean, you covered it. 18 years in law enforcement, the last 6 of it being as a supervisor, a patrol sergeant. I spent the majority of my time on patrol and was on peer support. And at some point in time, realized, I really think I can give back more to this community of helpers. And so I went back to school, and here I am as a clinician now.
Awesome. Yeah. And so Jasmine and I did the peer support conference. We partnered up and presented on this exact topic, sort of the mind-body connection. So she was an amazing resource, has an incredible way of connecting with people. So I think this is going to be really meaningful. But we'll jump right into it. So, as I mentioned, we covered with our crews the importance of sleep, nutrition, and movement. But that's kind of to take care of, ourselves long term. But I think it's important to help us understand like how our body responds to trauma, how we process some of that, and long term what that means. Because I think as you look at careers, folks are in these careers obviously for a long time and compounding chronic stress. So I guess one of the first places we would start with like just a real brief touch point of parasympathetic versus sympathetic nervous system, how they kind of work independently, and like how those show up in our lives as first responders.
Yeah, so the autonomic nervous system has the branches parasympathetic and sympathetic. Both are required for us to live full, healthy, happy lives. And though sometimes they can get stuck on and become overactivated. And so the sympathetic nervous system, that's in charge of things like, that's in charge of mobilization, right? Getting me up and moving. It's in charge of things that we don't have to think about, right? So it's in charge of heart rate, breath rate, digestion, things like that. And then we've got the parasympathetic, which is also vital. And that's more the like rest and digest side. So that side, when functioning well, is able to just kind of keep us like, it keeps us kind of just like chill, right? It's responsible for doing things. Actually, I'm so sorry. The parasympathetic is in charge of digestion, just keeps us moving, right? Keeps us everything just kind of like, okay, if that makes any sense.
Yep, it does. And then so when we're looking at that, so we have these two systems that the goal is to be in balance, right?
Yeah.
So as first responders and, with all these life experiences we all have, how do we tend to process either events, whether they're traumatic or positive? How does the brain process that?
Okay, so it's a really interesting thing. So we've got this part of our brain. It's back here. Evolutionarily, it is the oldest part of our brain, and it is in charge of all of those things that I just kind of discussed. The breath rate, like all of those things that we don't have to think about doing. And it is also in charge of this fight or flight, right? So we've probably all heard of that when there's a life threat, fight, flight, freeze. That part of our brain has no language, no reasoning. It is simply in charge of giving us like these like I think of it like an alarm system, to be like, this is dangerous, and we need to either run away, we need to fight, or we need to completely shut down to be able to survive, right? So that part of our brain, like I said, doesn't have any language or anything like this. This part of our brain up here is in charge of our reasoning, our language, all of that kind of stuff. And so we like to think that that we are processing traumatic events fine, right? Like, well, I saw this thing, I did this thing, but I'm okay, and so I'm going to move on, right? Like, I'm a police officer, I'm in charge of the situation, everything's fine. But unfortunately, some of these traumatic events get imprinted in our brains in this part that has no reasoning, no language, right? So that when we, let's say, you went to a horrible car crash and it was a death and it was just, bloody and gross and horrible. And for whatever reason, the car, like when you arrived on scene, it looked like it was your grandma's car. Okay. And you can smell the gasoline coming out, like leaking out of the car, right? You can't, so that image, because there's a connection to your personal life and some serious sensory inputs, that has the potential to imprint on your nervous system. So that the next time you're getting, like, say, 6 weeks from now, you're getting gasoline, at the local Shell, and you smell the gas, it might bring you back to that place where you're like, oh my God, grandma, or whatever. Is any of that, am I making sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, as you go through careers, you have a few of these occurrences, right? Potentially where you're not sure why it triggers you or what that trigger, that
Yeah.
either the sound or the smell or the sight, whatever that happens to be, that brings you back there, right? So that kind of explains why that potentially could be forming up
Yeah.
that way.
Well, and that's what we do too, right? Is we go, well, why am I thinking about that thing? Well, because your brain back here that has no reason, right? No ability to explain, is reacting to this situation. And then we talk nonsense to ourselves up here because well, I should be over this. It wasn't actually grandma, right? And that's where we start to get into this like tug of war in our brains and we start to get unhealthy.
Okay. So I think this is it all brings it together here, but stress, right? So chronic stress, how does our body, it's probably a good place to start with, how does our body respond to stress? And then from there, we'll kind of go into like the effects of chronic stress. So maybe like what is stress initially? It's with the hormones and cortisol and all those things, how our body reacts to it. And then let's kind of move into chronic stress, like how that plays out over time.
Okay. Yeah. So stress, it's such an interesting thing because there'll be people who go, oh, there's good stress and there's bad stress. And it's like, okay, sure. I get where they're coming from, but also anything that activates the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight system, that what that does is it's mobilizing us to move. It's mobilizing us to run away from the threat or fight the threat, right? And it releases adrenaline, cortisol. It increases our heart rate, our breath rate. It increases muscle tension, all of this stuff that happens in our body when this is happening. Yeah. And what can happen is, and I know a lot of us first responders, we will engage in physical activities, and normally, like we're all like CrossFit guys or like Orange Theory or whatever, and it's super, super awesome, but it's also releasing the same amount of adrenaline, cortisol, etc., into your body that you already have like all of this stuff from work, And our bodies don't know the difference. Our bodies don't know the difference between like what's good and what's bad, right? It's just like there. And that kind of chronic stress, both on the job and off, can lead to our sympathetic nervous system kind of being like stuck on. So I think of that like, so then I'm in this fight or flight place with the muscle tension, the breath rate change, the heart rate change, right? All of that stuff, like thinking of like every possible scenario that could happen, etc. All the time. And what that can lead to is what I kind of think of like if you're driving your car in the red, right? With the RPMs in the red, I always think of it as what happens to your car. At some point in time, it's going to break down. Yeah. And so our bodies do the same thing. If we run in the red all the time, at some point in time, our bodies are going to break down. And that's when we enter that kind of freeze state, because our bodies and our brains go, we can't keep doing this or else we're going to die. We're going to have a heart attack. And so we got to shut it down to preserve life. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so it's the hyper arousal, right? So kind of car in the red
Yeah.
for as long as that's sort of sustainable with before changes are made, right? Before something happens.
Yeah.
And then from there becomes hypoarousal, where there's just not a lot happening. Is that right?
Yeah, because the body recognizes it needs to shut down for survival.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's the hypo arousal place where you're feeling shut down, withdrawn, disinterested. This is where your body, you can feel super fatigued all the time, regardless of if you're sleeping well or not. It even has that like dissociation, which like a lot of people are like, what's that? It's really just like, I'm not here. Right. And that can look like a lot of things. It used to be scrolling on the TV, right? That you're not really paying attention. You're just click, 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 click. We don't really do that anymore with all the streaming services. But now what do? Scroll on our phone, and all of a sudden it's hours later, or play video games, and all of a sudden it's hours later, right? That is dissociation as well.
Got it. And so anxiety, does that fit into this whole equation on the hyper arousal? Does that take tend to see it, and then more on the depression side for the hypo arousal?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Okay. And so when we're talking about symptoms of that, right, of the hyperarousal leaning towards anxiety, I mean, we talked about a little bit of the heart rate, but like, what are we seeing? How are people presenting with that? Or like, what are some lookouts for people to kind of watch out in themselves and others?
So generally it's going to be the racing thoughts, always preparing for the worst case scenario, like that's kind of, we're trained to do that. But the hard part is when we start doing that everywhere we go, like when I go to the grocery store, if I'm looking for threats at the grocery store, I'm in that like heightened place, that hyper arousal place. Because it's not normal, right? To go to the grocery store and be looking for exits and, like, well, if this happens, how am I going to respond? Like, how am I going to save this guy? Like, that's not normal. So that's something that we have to be really mindful about. How else does it show? So it's the racing thoughts. It can be excessive worry about everything, anything, inability to shut things down, to let that parasympathetic the healthy parasympathetic take over to be able to sleep at night. So maybe I'm not sleeping. maybe I have really bad sleep disturbance, so nightmares. Or I wake up and I can't go back to sleep, that kind of thing. I might be super irritable, angry, fearful, right? These different kind of there's a potential for body shakes, moving around a lot. Somebody's like always kind of like gotta be going. Another thing is that I see a lot in my office is, well, I just stay super, super busy. Stay super busy. And I do this 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 and I do this. And that tells me that they've got some stuff that they aren't working on, right? So they're staying super busy so that they can avoid feeling what's going on.
So using their business as a distraction, essentially, to kind of push down the road.
Yeah, and that can look like a lot of different. It can look healthy, right? It can look moderately healthy, like, or it can look not healthy, right? Like I kind of think of excessive working out. Working out is fantastic. It's wonderful. When I'm working out excessively so that I don't have to feel, right? Now we're looking at like, oh, that is a maladaptive coping technique.
Yeah. And that's a good point. I think when we're talking about adaptations or maladaptive in this case, like the excessive workout that takes it to an extreme, right? It takes away from moderation and using that as a healthy stressor to kind of relieve cortisol and all those things, but you're taking to an extreme, right?
Yeah.
Other maladaptives that you see that are common as a result to help with kind of the hyperarousal. I would assume sort of alcohol use is high on that scale. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Alcohol, alcohol will sometimes be used. People will say, like, oh, well, I use it so I can go to sleep at night. I use it to quiet down my brain, that kind of stuff, right? And it is it's alcohol is at its core a poison that anesthetizes your brain. So it literally numbs your brain. The hard part with that is it doesn't just numb the bad, right? It numbs the good stuff too. We can't selectively numb, and alcohol numbs it all. It also, what alcohol will do is you first of all, it will 100% affect your sleep. It makes it worse. It doesn't make it better. It never makes it better. You'll go, oh, I fall asleep. Sure, you fall asleep, but when do you wake up? Right? Because your brain is actually striving for this equilibrium, and you've introduced a depressant into your brain, and it's going to start working to counteract that with more like adrenaline, right? Because it wants to stay in this equilibrium place. And so you're going to wake up at 3:00 in the morning with your heart racing, sweating, can't get back to sleep, right? Because you've got all this excessive adrenaline, et cetera, running through your body, so that because your brain doesn't know that now the depressant is gone, right? Another piece is that we process a lot of the traumatic events that we've gone through when we're sleeping. And since it interrupts sleep, and it certainly interrupts REM sleep, which is really important, that's the dreaming piece, right? It kind of like, I've heard it described as like our sleep cycle is like a washing machine. It just kind of washes out our stuff. It's like, oh, I've done this before. This is over, right? And it kind of solidifies those memories so that they don't keep coming up with which is what like PTSD does. It's like not a completed memory. It's open for some reason. The brain doesn't think that it's over. And alcohol inhibits that. Another thing is that any anytime you have even one sip of alcohol, your body will stop doing everything else that it's doing. So if you worked out today and it's working on repairing your muscles, etc., your body will stop doing all of that stuff and it will start trying to get the alcohol out of your system because it's a poison, right? Because it is harming your body. And so your body's like, and it tries to get it out.
Yep. Yep.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And it's, alcohol use is prevalent in the first response fire service community. It's all over. It's cultural.
Oh, yeah.
It's part of it. So I think it's just important to kind of understand the impact it could have, right? And just, when you're going to consume it, just know that it has that impact. So, so what are some ways that you suggest to kind of deal with this, like stresses as they come in a healthy way? We talked just briefly about the maladaptive. What are the positive things that people can be doing that help with alleviating stresses that we see so we're not getting into that chronic stress loop and then working towards, hyper arousal and then eventually hypo? So what are some of those?
So the science says that the number one most important thing to avoid PTSD. Now we talk about post-traumatic stress disorder, but like not everybody develops PTSD, but it is prevalent in our fields. But the number one thing that science has shown to reduce the chances of a first responder developing post-traumatic stress disorder is good, healthy connections with other people.
Okay.
One thing that we like to do is isolate, right? And we go from this place of, I don't want to burden anyone. My wife doesn't need to hear this. I can talk to my buddies, right? But like good, healthy connection and a healthy support system shows to be one of the best protective factors from developing PTSD. We have to let other people in.
Yeah. And so,
I'm like, really, like, that's so important.
Yeah. And so that kind of just normalizing that conversation, right? That's where I think this starts.
Normalizing the fact that we're going through hard times, that we had a hard call, that we saw something icky, right? Because our jobs are like packed full of stuff that no human being is ever supposed to experience.
Mm-hmm.
Packed full of those experiences. And we have to be able to talk about them. We have to be able to at least feel the emotion, right? Yes, your wife probably doesn't want to know about the baby that got run over by, a garbage truck. Probably not. She doesn't want to hear that. What she wants to hear about is how it's making you feel.
Yeah.
That was really painful, right? It's way different than I saw a kid's brains on the ground. Right?
Yep. And
Am I going too deep, Brandon?
No, and I think that's a good point because I think it's finding, like, establishing the network probably ahead of time. So it's this whole resilience conversation as you go through a career is like build up that network of people who you can have this conversation with, and the conversation is going to be different likely between your wife or partner versus somebody who experienced the call with you, right?
Yeah.
So, it's not necessarily metering your conversation, but you can have a different conversation about the exact same incident with different people that touch on different aspects of it.
Oh yeah. And that's super valuable too, being able to talk about it to somebody who gets it, right? I mean, like you and I can have a much different conversation than one that you might have with your wife, right? Yep. Because like, even though you're firearm law enforcement, we still get it. We go to the same calls, right? But being able to, yes, have those connections with people that are outside of work too, right? Because a lot of those times, I don't know about the fire service, but the police service, it turns straight into this like bitching and moaning session, right? Where all we're doing is just like one-upping each other on how like shitty life is, right? Sorry for the swear words. And that's not going to be beneficial. What is beneficial is being able to say, that call was terrifying. That call really sucked. I didn't want to see that today. You know, that kind of stuff. But our cultures are so like, you know, like, oh, I got into a fight and da 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 da, instead of like, that was actually really scary.
Right. Yeah, the sort of the negative side becomes a little bit more normal, right? Tend to normalize it just for ego
and
reasons or
exciting.
whatever. Yeah, it's exciting or whatever.
And then you go, oh, I would have done this, or I would have done this. Like,
yeah,
come on.
exactly. Let's talk for just a second about because I think that's really important. Is just establishing connection within your like having those connections established ahead of time. And like last month we talked about the importance of again physical movement, sleep patterns.
Yeah.
Eating right, like caring for yourself and sort of doing that self-care, establishing that as the baseline, the normal, like just trying to get there. It doesn't happen out, overnight, but working to just kind of get that built into your culture as a department, individually, like what that looks like. But in terms of resources, you're a counselor. So let's just real briefly talk about like what that looks like. Because I think some of the times I went and saw a counselor a couple years ago, I was experiencing anxiety, all this stuff sort of built up. One of the things that was limiting for me was just this like, I don't want to go talk to somebody about this and like not knowing what that would look or feel like. So when somebody's going to interact with a counselor or choose one, like how does that initially go, right? Like, can you talk through that? I think it's like a consult or in person, Zoom.
Yeah. So, I'll be honest, like I'm a unique critter in a lot of ways. I'm a unique counselor because I have this background, for one, and then the authenticity that I add to just like any interaction. Like I am who I am. The important thing for people to remember is, first of all, I think of counselors like shoes. Okay, you go to the shoe store, you pick a pair that you think you like, oh, it looks good, you try it on, and you go, no, this isn't it, right? So are you going to take that pair of shoes off and be like, forget this, I'm leaving shoeless?
Right.
No. You're going to pick another pair. Does this pair work? Does this pair work? Right? Depending on what you're trying to accomplish.
Yep.
So that you pick the pair that works for you, right? Because we're not one size fit all. Some people won't like that I'm very direct, that I use swear words, right? Some people don't like that I've been in law enforcement. Okay, go pick somebody else. And it's not like a mean thing. It's like, I recognize that I have positive traits and strengths, and that I have things that I need to work on, or weaknesses, or blind spots even to some stuff, Yep. And so when we're working with like trying to figure out what counselor to pick, have a consultation call. Talk to them about what's going on. Ask them questions. What do you do if this? What happens if this? What, what is your modality? How do you think, right? Like, do you think that we can work on this? Do you think that this is something that's possible to heal? Because that's all stuff that's going to be really, really incredibly valuable for someone to hear. If they call somebody up and they go, hey, I'm a firefighter. I've done this for however many years. I've seen a lot of really horrible stuff. Do you work with are you capable of doing this? And the clinician is like, probably not,
Right.
right? If if you call somebody and you're like, well, this horrible stuff happens, and they go, I don't know, probably not, right? Because when people call me, I'm like, yeah, well, of course you can't sleep. Of course you're having these, like recurring thoughts. Of course you're drinking more alcohol than you want to be, right? Because you've gone through a lot of horrible stuff and we can get you back on track. It's gonna take a lot of work.
Yep. And I think it's like you said, it's finding the right fit because you're going to be exposing and having conversations that are deeply emotional and personal to yourself. And it's finding that right person. And I've had a number of people that I've worked with through like peer support who were like, I don't need a counselor. I'd called one, it didn't work out. I used EAP. I did the EAP,
Yeah.
free referred counselor, and it wasn't great. So I'm not going to use that different. I'm going to go down a different route. And it's sad to watch. And for me, it's like, no, just at least here's a couple other references to try. Because it may not be the right fit, right? Or maybe it works in this certain set of scenarios, but then maybe it needs to go into relationships and marriage and family, and then you can work on a different path, right? So,
Yeah. And maybe it works for a while,
right,
plateaus, and you go, I actually need to work with someone who does EMDR, or I need to work with someone who's, does this or whatever.
yeah,
And that's okay.
exactly. So I think the key is just getting in the door, having the first call, having the consultation, figure out if the shoes fit, so to speak, and then going from there.
Yeah. Do you like that?
Yeah, I love that analogy. That's a great one because it's true. Don't give up, don't walk out barefoot. So, okay, so you're with It's Just Therapy.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. How do people get in touch with you if they're interested in kind of having a consult call? I think that's the initial first place to start. Is it best if I share your email through the contact?
You can share my email, share my phone number. I am an elder millennial, and so I do prefer text messages. But what I do is, if somebody calls me and goes, "Hey, Jasmine, this is what I'm thinking about," I'll text them generally and set up a time to have a consultation call. Free consultation call, normally about 20 minutes long, where I kind of get an idea of what they're going through, what they're hoping to get, a little bit about who I am and what I can provide. See if we're a fit, right? Um, I, as an aside, hesitate around clinicians who are not willing to provide a consultation call because I don't. How do you get to know them before you walk in for the first? I don't really like that, but that's just me.
Yeah.
That's just me. But yeah, like we'll have a brief chat, see if we fit, and then we'll set up an appointment.
Okay. All right. I love that. I'll put your contact information in the newsletter. I think that's really valuable. And then we'll also post when the office hours will be, not necessarily to walk through any personal circumstances, but if you're interested in learning more about hyperarousal, chronic stress, cortisol, things like that, I think that's a really good conversation that a lot of people can benefit from.
Yeah.
But I think
or just joking around, talking shit.
Yeah, I think that's part of it, right? That's part of the culture we're all in. So, yeah, this is super valuable. Thanks so much for joining. And if there are questions, I'm certain people will reach out. So, with that, Jasmine, thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. I hope it's helpful.